On January 29, 2021, journalist and CNN chief international correspondent Crystal Mangum interviewed Martin Barron, the executive editor of the Washington Post.
How difficult was it to be a newspaper editor in the time of Trump? Famously, in the year after he was inaugurated, you instituted the Post's first ever slogan, or first ever, headline, in which you wrote, "Democracy dies in darkness." That was the rallying cry for your newspaper. Tell me about, what the thought that went into actually doing that. First time in 240 years of the Washington Post.
Well, it wasn't connected to Trump. It was when Jeff Bezos acquired us in 2013, he wanted to have a motto that captured the essence of our mission at the Post. And of course, the Post has had a long history and a heritage of shining light in dark corners, of holding power to account. And we were trying to come up with a motto that would encapsulate that. Democracy dies in darkness is an adaptation of a phrase that was used by a judge at the time of Watergate. And Bob Woodward, famous Post journalist, had been using that phrase a lot in his own speaking engagements around the country, and it seemed appropriate. That is our mission, is to shine a light in dark corners. Democracy depends on that, and that's a motto that, while we created it during the Trump administration, it was not targeted at the Trump administration, and it's one that we will maintain during the Biden administration.
If democracy dies in darkness, can the same be said about justice? A March 13, 2006 late-night beer-guzzling, stripper-oogling spring break bash held at a Durham bungalow and hosted by the raucous Duke Lacrosse team was the impetus for what would become known as the Duke Lacrosse case or scandal. Single mother and North Carolina Central University student Crystal Mangum was one of two African-American females assigned to provide exotic dancing entertainment for the approximately 50 white male student-athletes. The only African-American lacrosse player on the Duke Lacrosse team was at the event. The performance was aborted shortly after it began, and Miss Mangum claimed that she was sexually assaulted by three partygoers in the bathroom of the residence. A claim she staunchly stands by today. Then Durham District Attorney Mike Nifong believed Mangum had been assaulted, and based on her eyewitness photo lineup, with a high degree of certainty, he indicted three of the white student-athletes. Despite cautions by colleagues and others against pursuing the case, and advice to drop the criminal case against the three, DA Nifong proceeded. He proceeded until he was forced off the case by a self-initiated grievance against him filed by the North Carolina State Bar. The following year, in early January 2007, Nifong turned the case over to then North Carolina Attorney General Roy Cooper. His 3-month so-called investigation included a 6-hour Crystal Mangum interview by two assistant attorneys general, which was not taped, videoed, audio recorded, or transcribed. In other words, as Mangum's Durham attorney Anita Hunt learned, there was no recording or record of this supposedly seminal interview. On April 11, 2007, Attorney General Roy Cooper made a public promulgation in which he not only dropped the criminal investigation in the Duke Lacrosse case, but unprecedentedly proclaimed that the 3 Duke Lacrosse defendants were innocent, thus shoring up grounds for the subsequent $20 million each out-of-court settlement the 3 defendants negotiated with Duke University. Reasons for the university's capitulation being ambiguous. Whereas Cooper's innocence claim was prearranged in a meeting between Joseph Cheshire's attorney, Brad Bannon, and Assistant Attorneys General Mary Winstead and Jim Coleman that provided a financial windfall to the trio of defendants, it also laid a false foundation upon which the media could assert as fact that Crystal Mangum lied about being sexually assaulted at the Duke Lacrosse party. And that is precisely what the media did, many of them christening her as the, quote, false accuser, unquote. Roy Cooper's April 2007 averments put pieces in place for the Duke Lacrosse myth to take form, it consisting of 3 components. The first being that Crystal Mangum lied about being sexually assaulted at the party. The second component of the myth was that Durham DA Mike Nifong was prosecuting the case for political purposes only, a meritless claim based solely on the fact that he was simultaneously running for election to the district attorney position to which he had been appointed. The premise of the media being that Nifong would gain favor among Durham's black electorate with his prosecution of the case. The third component completing the myth was that the 3 Duke Lacrosse defendants were innocent victims of Crystal Mangum and Mike Nifong. To embed and perpetuate the Duke Lacrosse myth, the media lionized them while vilifying Crystal Mangum and Mike Nifong, the false accuser and the disgraced former district attorney, respectively. In strengthening the myth, the media promoted stories that disparaged or denigrated Mangum and Nifong, and suppressed or adversely slanted those that shined a favorable or positive light on them. For example, the media coverage of anticipated testimony by Mike Nifong in the Darrell Howard hearing at the Durham County Courthouse failed miserably because he was not called to the stand, Howard's attorneys accurately assessing the former DA to be a competent and credible witness. Years later, Crystal Mangum would provide media with the opportunity to savage her character and reputation following a domestic violence incident with her boyfriend. That Crystal Mangum was considered a societal pariah, scorned and held in contempt by many Durhamians, Tarhalians, and Americans familiar with the Duke Lacrosse case expounded by the media, is irrefutable, commonly accepted. A little more than 5 years after the Duke Lacrosse incident, in the wee morning hours of Sunday, April 3, 2011, Crystal Mangum poked her jealously enraged, drunk, alcoholic boyfriend, Reginald Day, in his left side with a steak knife, in a fight for her life. Day straddled atop her and strangling her with his hands. The non-fatal wound she inflicted enabled her to escape with her life, but provided a path for payback by the state, courts, and media. Although the stab wound had been successfully repaired in surgery at Duke University Hospital with a post-operative prognosis for a full recovery, treatment of his alcoholic withdrawal was inadequate and resulted in delirium tremens. It was during management of this condition that, either through providence or design, he was intubated in his esophagus instead of trachea, a mistake that was not timely recognized and led to his brain death. A week of observation without neurologic improvement convinced Day's family to agree to his elective removal from life support, after which he died, 10 days following his hospital admission. The morning of Thursday, April 14, 2011, then North Carolina Deputy Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Clay Nichols conducted an autopsy on Mr. Day. His findings included discrepancies with other medical records, including the operative report and EMS report. For example, whereas the operative report listed only a laceration to the upper left flexure of the colon and a minor lesion to the spleen, Dr. Nichols' autopsy report indicated additional lacerations to Day's left lung, diaphragm, stomach, and left kidney. Furthermore, an EMS report at the scene and a preoperative orthopedic surgery consultation assessed all extremities to be free of injury or interruptions in the skin, whereas Dr. Nichols' autopsy report cited multiple linear scabbed over lesions on Day's left upper extremity, which he described as, quote, defensive injuries, unquote. Finally, the integrity of Dr. Nichols' report is complicated by his failure to follow standard autopsy procedure by photographically documenting pertinent findings and non-findings. Clearly, it is difficult to document by photographs injuries that are fabricated. Dr. Clay Nichols' conclusion that Reginald Day, quote, died as the result of complications of a stab wound to his chest, unquote, is not only false and unsubstantiated, but the medical examiner has never identified the alleged complications. Nowhere in Dr. Nichols' autopsy report is there any mention of the initial esophageal intubation, the subsequent cardiac arrest, the reintubation, the brain death following resuscitation, or the elective removal from life support that immediately precipitated Reginald Day's death. Although the official April 14, 2011 autopsy report document by Dr. Nichols was fraudulent and misleading, another document held in prosecution discovery presented a much more accurate picture about Mr. Day's demise. An email sent the same day of April 14th from an unknown individual to Crystal Mangum's attorney, Woody Van. Germane portions of the electronic transmission about Day's death include, quote, the guy passed away yesterday. There's supposed to be something in the medical records where Duke did something wrong with a tube and nothing related to a knife injury. A supporting passage in the email reads, quote, someone that works at Duke saw the records about the complication from the procedure, unquote. Remarkably, this exculpatory email was never presented before the jury that would later convict Crystal Mangum of second-degree murder 2.5 years later. The sender of the email would never be identified, interviewed, or summoned to testify at trial, all to the detriment of an innocent defendant, Crystal Mangum. Most importantly, the final sentence clearly signifies Duke University's intent and reads, quote, later a lady told me that he, Reginald Day, was gone and Duke was keeping it quiet because it wasn't due to knife wound, unquote. How better for Duke University to keep the truth of Day's death quiet than by silencing the media? Something it did with great efficiency, and for years, up to today, the general public would be in the dark about the manifest injustice suffered by the Duke Lacrosse accuser because the media, in concert, has elected not to shine a spotlight on it.
Am Anfang bin ich noch zusammengezockt, obwohl ich einen Fahrschein hatte, wenn die Kamen zufuhr und die Tür schloss nach dem Tod.
As early as April 14, 2011, the day after Reginald Day's demise, Medical staff at Duke University Hospital were aware that the instrument of Reginald Day's death was an endotracheal tube and not a steak knife. That medical malpractice and not a non-fatal stab wound was responsible for his death. This is evidenced by an email sent by an unidentified individual to Crystal Mangum's attorney, Woody Van, a document of profound importance that was never brought to the attention of the jury in Mangum's case. By mid-2012, then Attorney General Roy Cooper and other government officials, politicians, and the media were aware that Crystal Mangum was not only innocent of murder, but that the manner of Reginald Day's death was an accident due to medical malpractice and not a homicide secondary to the stab wound inflicted by Mangum. The general public, however, was unaware of the truths of Mangum's innocence because the media, in concert, secreted these truths from it. Even after Mangum's November 2013 conviction, legislators in the General Assembly were informed of her no-crime wrongful conviction in a February 11, 2015 email sent to them by Dr. Sidney Harr, subject titled, quote, Crystal Mangum convicted for non-existent crime, unquote. In a bonus clip of an Oxygen Channel Snapped episode that aired in October 2018, Carlos Wilson, the nephew of Reginald Day, opined that he felt Crystal Mangum was being punished for her role in the Duke Lacrosse case. He verbalized that Crystal Mangum was not responsible for his uncle's death and instead blamed her for the stab wound that brought him to Duke University Hospital for treatment.
I felt sad for Miss Mangum because I truly think they sentenced her from the Duke Lacrosse case. They punished her. She did a horrific thing when she stabbed my Uncle Reginald. You know, he didn't die from her actual stab wounds, but he died from her cause and effect of putting him in the hospital where he had to pass away, you know, from some complications. So I feel that Miss Mangum could have prevented all of this. You know, this goes along to treatment.
The coup de grace defining Crystal Mangum's innocence in Reginald Day's death was delivered a year later on October 25, 2019, when world-renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Wecht issued his report on Crystal Mangum's case, containing two striking pronouncements. First and foremost, the manner of Day's death was an accident due to misplacement of an endotracheal tube in treating his delirium tremens. Because the manner of death was not a homicide, there was no legal basis for the prosecution in his death. No crime was related to his death. In a case in which no crime has been committed, innocence is absolute. Secondly, and as importantly, Dr. Wecht's position was that the opinions of the medical examiner regarding the manner and cause of death were unreliable because of the significant discrepancies between the autopsy report and the medical hospital records. The entirety of the Durham District Attorney's Office's murder charge was grounded in the medical examiner's fraudulent official autopsy report and his materially perjured trial testimony. It is important to keep in mind that the medical examiner, Dr. Clay Nichols, was fired prior to Crystal Mangum's November 2013 murder trial, and that he was under consideration at that time for criminal investigation for his professional actions in other cases. The October 25, 2019 report by Dr. Cyril Wecht cements the absolute innocence of Crystal Mangum for any reasonable person. Yet the media has colluded to prevent the people from learning of this crucial report and its ramifications. All media, with the exception of a single podcast, Women and Crime by criminologists Dr. Megan Sachs and Amy Schlossberg. That podcast, titled, quote, Episode 30, Interview with Crystal Mangum, unquote, was published November 3, 2020, and delves deeply into the report by Dr. Weck and its implications regarding the manifest injustice suffered by Ms. Mangum. The overall silence of the media regarding Dr. Weck's report demonstrates media culpability in the cover-up of the truths of Mangum's case for the purpose of promoting the Duke Lacrosse myth narrative by disparaging the Duke Lacrosse accuser.